Welcome to this video in which I'm going to be explaining to you how to store, retrieve and display images in applications. So this approach is an approach that is going to work for web, mobile applications. So you're used to storing text information and manipulating text information in your applications. You know how to store that in the database easily and retrieve that and use on your front end. That's easy to work with. What about images? Do you store those images directly in your database? And how do you retrieve them to display them on the front end? That's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So the approach I explain here is a very intuitive and simple approach and optimizes your applications to work with images very well. And stick along to the end of this video if you're interested in that. So I'm going to release this in two videos. The first video I'll just explain the approach, and in the next video we're going to be looking at an implementation of that approach in a web application. So the approach. So what's this famous approach I'm talking about? For those who are developers or those who are new, I'll just briefly explain this because applications are usually separated into a TBT architecture is the most common way of separating your applications. You have the front end, the back end, and the database, and they have their respective roles. The front end is what the users see and interact with. So if you have a website, for example, the website, when you land on the website, those who are the users who land on the website, they see all the components on this page, the cards, the buttons, the pictures they can see and interact with. That's the front end they see on their laptops and with their desktops, and they manipulate that. That's the front end of the application. For mobile applications, it's similar. The front end is also the application they download from their app or play stores. The different components they see, the buttons and all of that, all of the UI elements they can interact with forms the front end of both mobile and web applications. So the front end is actually what displays the data and the users interact with. What's the back end? The back end is what's going to manipulate that data. So the backend actually manipulates the data, and it's what is able to retrieve data from the front end, interpret the data, manipulate it, and store it in the database. The database is the actual store for the data. So why that's important is because if the database didn't exist, when you use your application, you close the application and come back to the application, you'll not be able to persist the state of the application. So the database helps you store data and the working state of different users in the application, such that when a new user logs in or the same user logs in, the application can know which user has logged in and can retrieve the data he had been using to display that same data to the user. So the database is very important for persistence, and the backend is the intermediary between the front end and the database, and it helps to communicate actually with the front end to get what the front end needs to display and store what the back end wants to store in the database. Okay, so that theory out of the way, what I'm interested in is talking about how images are stored, because all of that is working with text is very easy. Databases easily store text information. Working with images can be a bit tricky because there is the possibility of also storing images directly in the database and retrieving those images and displaying on the front end. The problem is storing images in the database directly can be cumbersome, and most databases as well and have limits to the size of entities or of data that can be stored in it. For example, NoSQL databases like MongoDB have a 50 megabyte document size, and you can't just store any kind of image in the database directly because that's really bulky and it's going to slow down your application. Another thing is you need to convert those images into a format which the database understands, like blob or binary, and that's also time consuming, and you will not like your system to be slow because you want to store images directly in the database and work with those images. There's the approach of also storing the images as in a folder in the backend. Like, okay, the front end needs an image, the front end is going to request that image from the backend, and since as the backend is a server, it can get those images from a folder in which those images are being stored in the backend and return to the front end. So that's another way, storing the images in the folder in the back end. You see that that level is closer to the front end, and the problem here is the back end as well is not really suited for storing images, because sometimes the memory of the back end is volatile, and you don't want to be storing images in a volatile memory storage where sometimes you may not find the images, especially if you have to do things like dockerize your backend and do some stuff. It may not be suited for storing images here. So the approach I present here is the best approach. It's very simple. It's going to work for web and mobile applications, and it's I would say it's very good. It's a nice approach to use, and I'll recommend that for all your apps going forward. So what do? I introduce what we call an image storage service. So you see that the image storage service now is out of the backend. It's a separate service on its own, and it stores the different images you want to use in your application. It's going to store those images directly here. You see that it's also closer to the front end. And what happens is, okay, let's say you want to store an image. What you do is to interact with the image storage service. Image storage services are going to provide you with some APIs, which is actually just a library you need to install and use on your front end. So what you do is you communicate with those APIs that understand how to communicate with the image storage service. You want to store an image, you pass the image to you communicate the image with the API. What happens is the image storage service now is going to save that file or that image directly in the image storage service. So it's going to save the file, and it's going to return you what we call a URL, or let's say a reference to that image on the internet. So with that reference or the URL, the link to that image on the internet, you can display the image directly on your front end. So that's very straightforward. You communicate with the image storage service, you store the image you want, it gives you a URL, you can use that URL to display the image here on the front end. So the good thing now is you can decide to use that URL or reference and store that URL or reference in your own database, so that at any point in time you can know which image you want to use for a particular activity. So what will happen is, if the user disconnects or he turns off his device, your backend can make a request, get the URL or the link to the image which is being stored here in this image storage service, and you can display the image directly. So the advantage here now is you're not storing the image itself directly in the database. You're storing its reference, or you're storing its URL, which is the URL or the reference of the image which is actually being stored here. The actual image is being stored here, but you can store its reference or URL in your database, and you can display that image here on your front end. So guys, that's it. And in the next video, I'm going to be explaining how this can be implemented in a web application. Remember, as I said, that this approach is not only for web applications. It's an approach that works for both web and mobile applications. But I'm just going to show you simple implementation for web applications. The concept stays the same. You just need to have an image storage service. You can choose any image storage service of your choice, any backend of your choice, any database of your choice, and any front end of your choice. The concept stays the same, and I'm going to be showing just a demo, simple implementation in the next video for web applications using these different technologies. And guys, if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like for this video, comment in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video.